Good evening and welcome to tonight's live lecture. I'm Patricia Simpson, Director of Political and Online Training here at the Leadership Institute. We're joined again by Paulo Sabaha, who is our Director of Coalitions in the Grassroots Department, and he does a lot of different outreach and initiatives, and we're really excited to have him as part of the team, new in 2013. He's going to talk to us tonight about fundraising the art of the ask. Paulo, let's just get right into it. What do you have for us tonight?
Well, Patty, thank you very much for having me again. I'm happy to be back, and we're going to talk about person-to-person fundraising. It's obviously very critical in whatever you do, whether you are a head of an organization or in charge of fundraising for an organization to even a campaign. So like you said, we're going to just jump right into it. Personal solicitation, person-to-person fundraising. The topics that we will cover in this discussion includes how much does it take to win, why you need to ask people for money, developing a systematic approach, research, answering key questions for the ask, making the ask, pointers, a few do's and a few don'ts, and that essentially is what we'll discuss tonight. Let's go ahead and get started. How much does it take to win? Well, let's go ahead and take a few averages. In 2012, the average U.S. House campaign cost about $1.3 million. And to put that into perspective, let's go ahead and break it down a little bit. That means 1,300 contributions of $1,000 each, or about 4 $1,000 contributions every day for 1 full year. If you are raising money from more locals, it's low funds, it would equal to 10,000 contributions of $130 each. So fundraising can be a daunting task, but at the same time can be a very productive task if done right. It's something that will help you win come election day or come the execution of your project. One key point that we have to remember here is that not all races for public office are created equal. The statistics I just gave you, or the average I just gave you, 1.3 million, is an average. You got to remember that. It doesn't mean that if you're in a competitive district, all you have to raise is 1.3 million. No, if it's a competitive district, you'll likely be raising more. Is it a state house? Is it a state senate? Perhaps a local city council race. So what you want to do is you want to do your research. You want to go online, usually the Secretary of State's website, if they're the ones who govern election finance laws, or if it's your local state, for example, at the federal level, it's the FEC, and you can kind of compile this information. I also recommend going to Open Secrets, and that's a website. Just Google Open Secrets, and they will kind of give you an overall breakdown per congressional district, per state, etc., how much money was raised for that particular congressional district, and it'll give you a better understanding. So you have to remember, whatever office you are running for or whatever project, if you do go and you look at the history of how much it costs to conduct a project similar to yours, if it's a proposition, referendum, or whatever, or if it's a congressional, state senate, state assembly, state house, whatever race you're going to jump into, you have a better understanding. So just keep in mind, these numbers are just averages and not necessarily the golden rule. But the unique thing about it is when you look at it and you break it down, it gives you a kind of sense of what it takes to raise that kind of money. So let's go ahead and move on. Why ask people for money? Our next slide. Well, personally raising funds is one of two functions. The candidate is most effective. And quite frankly, there's only 2 jobs that a candidate should be doing at a campaign. And that is, number 1, asking for votes, and then number 2, asking for money. So 50% of his time or her time asking for money, the other 50% campaigning, asking for votes. Plain and simple. If your candidate isn't doing such, your candidate is not doing his or her job. Or your organizational leader, whether it's the president, chairman, etc., their main priority should be to raise funds. The other is that a campaign plan, you may have the greatest plan, but unless you have the funding to execute that plan, your plan can be useless. And we want to make sure that we give you the tools necessary to raise funds in the next few minutes so you are able to execute your plan flawlessly. And third, personally asking for funds actually bestows a level of credibility to your campaign. Why credibility? Because it shows that you're serious enough, that you're willing to sit down, make those phone calls, meet with the donors, and move ahead in whatever project you're working on. It lends credibility. Personal solicitation. So, a lot of people have this stigma. Personal solicitation has this stigma. Asking for money, people think you're actually begging. We're going to tell you, look at it a different way. Look at it as an investment. When individuals go out there and they're starting a company, what do? They go to investors and they say, we'd like for you to be our partners in growing our company. Look at a campaign and look at a project the same way. It is a way for individuals to invest in your campaign, in your cause. One of the individuals who's done very, very good at doing this was Ron Paul. During his campaigns, he had a lot of days where he just had fundraising. He had a barometer, or a meter in his website, and people knew how much they were raising and how much closer they were to that particular goal. Well, he was able to get people engaged, people who wouldn't otherwise be engaged, because they wanted to invest in the cause. They wanted to invest in his campaign. So asking for money is not begging. You're asking people to invest.
Speaking of visualizing a goal, some campaigns don't want anyone to know how much money they've raised until they can report it at the end of a quarter. What are the advantages of waiting, and what are the advantages of actually letting people visualize that money being raised?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. So obviously, if Ron Paul, for example, I'm going to go back to Ron Paul. He didn't let everyone know how much he'd raised. He had days in which they set a goal. Let's say, for example, I don't remember from the top of my head, but we'll go ahead and say $1 million. If his goal was to raise $1 million for that particular day, people who knew about it and they'd build up this momentum leading up to that particular day could actually track how much closer they were to meeting that goal. Now, oftentimes you hear campaigns releasing information prior to an FSC report, or if they've had a very successful fundraising event, they say, we've raised this much money, which is the most ever raised by the quarter. It's a sign of momentum. So you have to understand it's also an opportunity for you to go on the air, sell your message, and have that hook of how much money you've raised as the opening statement or the reason why you're being booked on television, getting some free media. So it'll have to depend on how much money you've actually raised, whether or not it would be beneficial for you to go out there and kind of show your cards, depending on what your opponents are doing. But it really is, there's no right or wrong answer. It depends on the circumstances, essentially. But you do want to have visual aids if individuals want to know what they're doing actually is helping a cause. Maybe you do it not necessarily by money, but you want 1,000 people to donate to your campaign, and you have that as the way to measure support. You're close. You're 900. You have 900 individuals who donated, 100 away from that 1,000-person donation goal. You don't tell people how much you've actually raised, but you've incorporated people who wouldn't otherwise participate. So, moving on, a lot of individuals who participate in politics, for example, often get involved by volunteering. Well, there's also a segment of the population that doesn't get involved by volunteering, who doesn't get involved in activism, but the way that they do get politically involved is by writing a check. So this is a great way to actually allow individuals who don't have the time, perhaps, who are just too busy to get politically involved, by having them, remember, invest in your cause. So it's important to remember that. You have to obviously develop a systematic approach and develop a database. So you have to identify potential donors. Potential donors for the organization might be different than for a campaign. If your organization is a public policy organization, or if your organization, for example, like the Leadership Institute, our whole purpose is to train conservatives out there. So if the organization's purpose is different, the way that you go about identifying potential donors might be a little different, because if it's issue-based, you want to obviously attract like-minded individuals. If it's a campaign, you want to bring in as many donors as possible from an array of special interests for that particular donor. You want to also determine the best way to approach the donor. Is the donor best or most likely to donate if they actually sit down with you one-on-one? Do they tend to respond to direct mail? Or do they tend to write checks at events? So by determining this will help you maximize the time that your candidate has in order to be able to target a little better who it is you wanna go after. You also have to research the donors. Who are they? Who are their family members? Where have they, if they have, donated before? To what causes? What organizations? What other candidates? What motivates them is extremely important. And you'll see that that donors, for the most part, will donate for several reasons. We'll talk about it in the coming slides, why it is that individuals tend to donate. But most donors usually have one particular issue or two sets of issues that they really, really like individuals to talk about. So in understanding that donor, when you're creating this list, this system to approach them, will give you a better understanding of how to go about asking for money when you do sit down with that individual or when you do make a phone call to that person. So, like anything in campaigns, your list is as good as anything. Your campaign, excuse me, is as good as your list. So what you want to do is you want to create an Excel document, and in this document you want to do essentially a brain dump. Anything and everything you know about that donor. One thing that my former boss used to do when we would create a list is he always listed if the individual was married, what his or her spouse, their name, birthdays for not only them but children, special information, so that way he could send them a handwritten happy birthday note to the donor. You want to make sure that you keep in touch with the donor. It's a relationship builder. You have to keep in touch with them if you want to continue to go essentially to the well. So creating a Excel sheet and putting as much information as you can, from date of birth, name, best way to get a hold of them, how do they like to meet? Do they like to meet in person, over the phone? Do they respond better, as we talked in the previous slide, by direct mail or an event? This is information you want to capture, ask others, go back to the previous campaign if they've dealt with this donor before and just ask for tips. Use your resources, use people who would be willing to help you, and just ask away and find out what best, how to best categorize, if you will, that donor. Next, your leader of the organization or your candidate has to set time. You have to set time for fundraising, because if you don't, and by setting time we mean actually writing it down on the schedule, because if you don't, most candidates don't want to raise money at all. They don't want to be sat down in a room with a phone and a cup of water and a list. They don't want to, because they feel like they're begging and not asking people for an investment.
What do you do if you're working on a campaign where the candidate absolutely refuses to raise any money? I know some friends that have worked on those campaigns where the candidate does not like to pick up the phone. They don't like to actively ask for donations. What is the role of the campaign staff in that instance?
Well, the campaign staff, the campaign manager specifically, should be the one pushing the candidate to fundraise. As we noted in the previous, one of the first slides, there's two main, and I should say almost the only two things the candidate should be doing, and both of them involve asking for money and asking for votes. The strategy, the planning, the communications, etc., that's all left to the staff. But a candidate needs to be fundraising. Why? Because he or she is the individual running for office. And by having that candidate do the phone calls, have those meetings, and asking people for money, it does bring credibility. You wouldn't want to send, let's say if you are an investor and it's your idea that you've developed, you want people to, it's a startup company, mom and pop shop, you want to grow it into a big corporation, but you just lack the money. You're not going to send your press secretary, you're not going to send someone from your office to do the bidding for you if it's your company you want to grow. Same thing, the candidate is the face of the campaign. So if you have a candidate who refuses altogether, you have to stress the fact that it is one of two of their jobs, one of two things that they must do at a campaign. Both involve asking. One of the things which we'll talk about, a few pointers, is do a little practice runs with individuals, literally pretend like there's someone on the other end, and that will usually relieve that tension that the candidate doesn't want, or that tension the candidate has, or refusal to do those phone calls. So it's extremely important, and if a candidate refuses, I would say continue to push it, because they have to be the ones making the phone calls. Now, with that said, we're gonna talk about it in a few slides. Sometimes it's best for a friend of the candidate or someone who knows a donor to approach the donor first, but still the ask should come from the candidate. It's important to know your campaign finance laws and limitations. Why is this important? Because if you don't know your finance laws and limitations, then your candidate, you as a candidate or as a leader of organization, won't know exactly how much you can ask for, and you may be breaking the law. So it's extremely important that you know for your particular state, if it's federal, if it's local, if it's governed by state law, what those laws are and the limits on those campaign contributions. So developing a good understanding of a potential donor. Here it was what I was talking about. Who should make the pitch? If you have a candidate who refuses to make the pitch, and you might want to go to someone who is friends with the donor. If the donor is good friends with this individual, you might want to have them essentially just do kind of a warm-up. What should the pitch be? This goes back to understanding the individual. Is he or she motivated by a particular issue? I'm going to go ahead and pick Sheldon Adelson, who is a very wealthy individual from Nevada, and he was the one who bankrolled Newt Gingrich's, this previous election, Newt Gingrich's Political Action Committee. He and his wife donated millions of dollars. Well, Sheldon Adelson and his wife are motivated by one particular issue, and that's support of Israel and Israeli-American relations. So, what should the pitch be if you're approaching Sheldon Adelson? And the reason why I like to use him is because he's a big name. People know what motivates him. The pitch should be obviously surrounded with the notion. Obviously, you would hope that your candidate is compatible with the donor that you're seeking, and finding common ground and discussing that pitch, but also understanding what it is that you want to do with that particular donor's money. So you must have a specific ask so you can give them an idea of what their money will go towards. How it should be delivered is also a question that you need to answer, and how much to ask for. If you're asking for an exuberant amount of money and it's a donor that typically does not donate that much money, they'll be put off. They'll likely not want to donate. So again, you have to find out, and this is all public records if they're a previous donor, how much it is that they give, or they've given before, historical evidence, empirical evidence, and then go about making a sound judgment as to how much to ask that particular donor. Also, you have to understand their motivations, why he or she gives. We'll talk about those. It might be different for access, etc. Those are coming up in a few slides. What other issues or causes motivates them, and how do these compare against your own? Again, it's important to know this, and you have to understand yourself and how compatible you are with the donor you're trying to reach. Next, the donor's personal history. If a donor has donated time and time again, election cycle after election cycle, this is good for you to know, because then you can kind of track how much, if there are seasons where they give more than they don't, depending on quarters. Most break it down by quarters. This is good for you to understand the personal history of that particular donor. So, reasons why people contribute. Number one, people tend to contribute because of access. You find a lot of special interest groups who do donate to political campaigns. They do so because they want access. They want to be able to call a meeting with the particular legislator, should they make it into office, and have the ability to call up the office and say, sure, we're going to go ahead and set a meeting for you. They do it for access. Two, people tend to do it for ego. They want to say that they were, one of the steering committee members who brought in this much money to whatever campaign. Some people do it because they believe. Again, it goes back to the cause, an investment. Others do it out of habit. There's people out there, let me give you a perfect example, and how habit can be tied to access as well. Donald Trump, in fact, had donated to Democrats and Republicans, to both parties, before he decided to run, or before he flirted with the idea of running for president under the Republican Party banner. Well, Donald Trump, because he's a businessman, has a lot of interest and understands that not always is the legislature or the federal government controlled by the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. He donated to both out of habit, but because he wanted access. So should the Democrats be in power? He wanted access. Should the Republicans be in power? He wanted access. Peer pressure is also a good one. One of the things we do when we're out in the field, we usually ask individuals to help us cover the cost. This is just a simple exercise. We go to the first person and said, you know, would it be okay if you give us $2, $3 additional dollars, and we need to pay for the food and we need to pay for the venue. We were a little shy. You will be surprised, I would say 9 times out of 10, how everyone in the room literally pulls out their wallet, pulls out their purse, and they're ready to hand me $2 or $3, because peer pressure, once that person agrees, the second person is likely to agree, and it's just a snowball effect. Fundraising is a great way to do this. Peer pressure is a great tool to deploy if you're doing an event and you want to fundraise out of that event. You may have someone who said, well, you know, I'm going to be the first one to donate this much money, and I challenge all of my friends and colleagues in this room to do the same. Get your wallet out, you know, make it a public event, and people are more likely to do so. Perfect example of this, ironically, is churches. Churches tend to pass around a plate where individuals put collections. How many times have you been in a church and the person to your right gives money and the person to your left gives money, and you see everyone on that aisle before that plate reaches you, they've given money? Are you going to be the odd one out? Do you not want to be the one who did not put any money on that plate? Peer pressure works when fundraising. So it's a good tactic, it's a good reason to understand, good to understand when having events, how that can be used for your campaign and for purposes to raise even more money. Now, special interest groups also donate for the impact of public policy, as did Donald Trump as a businessman. They want to make sure that the public policy pushed by the Congress or pushed by at the state level is favorable to his business, or in other cases, other businessmen. So not only are businessmen and women interested in public policy, but so are interest groups, unions, associations, chambers. These are all key players who tend to donate because they want to make sure that they will have the legislators' access, legislators' ear, and that they would be able to have a say when it came to pushing public policy through or defeating public policy. Number 7, party loyalty. Very simple. A lot of individuals want to do it just because they are lifelong Democrats, lifelong Republicans, lifelong, you name it. They donate because they've done it all of their lives. So that kind of ties into habit, but a little more than habit. It goes to the core of just being a proud Republican, being a proud Democrat. And number 8, quite simply, individuals were asked. And this is where, going back to that candidate who doesn't want to ask, if you don't ask, you'll likely not receive. So donors will give money because they simply were asked. You'll be surprised how simple and how easy it actually is.
That's a great list of reasons why people give. How do you discover what the reason is why a person gives? I mean, someone doesn't say, I have a big ego, so I'm going to give money if you give me access to a candidate or if you praise me. People obviously don't say that. So how do you determine what is their reason for giving?
Yeah, that's great. So how do you determine their reason for giving? Obviously, you look at their history. It's easy to go around and ask people. If you're running for a particular district, local race, I always say go back to the previous candidate who held that seat, if he or she happens to also share the same values as you do. If not, go to the candidate who last challenged that individual and talk to them and what people were good in supporting you. Other people, more likely than not, you'll be surprised how much they want to help someone else who wants to be in office. Now, obviously, if there's intra-party fighting, that's going to be a little more difficult. But if you go back to that person and you ask them, well, do you know that individual? What do you think of them? What motivates them? Simply asking around people who've done it before, people who've been part of that district. One of the reasons why it's always good to know the area or to know what district you want to represent, know the people, the key players. It will help you answer these questions. If it's someone, for example, who does it because they believe in the cause, you're going to find out very easy. You can look at their Facebook page, their kind of postings that they do, if they're very active on social media, if they have donated not only to candidates but causes. This is a good one. If it's a national cause, a local cause, it gives you an understanding of why it is that people donate. Now, just as there are reasons why people donate, there's also reasons why people do not contribute. And then one of the main reasons that we have them listed. Number 1 is actually they feel exploited. Let me go ahead and give you an example of this one. I was in New Mexico working for the RNC as the Hispanic Outreach Director, and I had a lady sweet lady who'd come into the office, and she brought a plethora of letters. And she said, I just don't get it, Paulo. I just don't get it. I've already donated. They're coming back to me and they're asking for more and more and more and more. She actually used the word exploited. I feel exploited. And I said, well, what happened? What do you mean? She's like, yeah, I already donated money. Why are they coming back to me? So I asked her, well, do you remember who you donated for? Well, I donated for the cause, for the campaign. And the letters that she had were from the NRC, RNC, so it was the political parties, to local candidates for the state house, to federal candidates for Congress, and then you had the actual presidential campaign going back for more money. She didn't know that there's so many different levels, and that she thought by donating once she was helping everyone out. Well, it went into a specific pot. So people, when they feel exploited, they will likely refuse to donate again. And it's quite frankly logical. Why would you want to help out again if you felt that you were just used when you did so the first time? Second is the appeal is too vague. And by being too vague, you've given the donor not enough reason, or you've left them with more questions than answer. What exactly is it that you want out of me? That's a reason why they wouldn't contribute to your campaign. The appeal is too unrealistic. You're asking for a lot more than they can give, or you've insulted them by asking them for an amount much lower than what they've typically given or what they're willing to give. Number 4, you have a bad messenger. This is where it can get tricky if you have other people go out there doing the ask for you. That's why it's important to have the candidate do it. Is that you actually had someone who wasn't able to convey the vision of your candidate or the vision of your leader, and they were not sure of themselves. They couldn't answer the donor's questions. That messenger wasn't clear in what he or she wanted answered, what he or she, the donor, wanted answered, and that obviously leads to problems. Who do you have to blame if you can't sell? If you can't sell your candidate, if the candidate's doing the selling, the candidate. But if you have a bad messenger who does it for you, then that will lead to more problems. No one other than that individual could be blamed for possibly messing up a donation, depending on the amount. Now, donor and candidate do not share a vision. That's point number 5. That's why it's also good for you to know what motivates these individuals. If, for example, your main priority in running for office, as my colleague likes to say, is privatizing the sidewalk, but that donor could care less about privatizing the sidewalk, and that's all you care about, and that's all you talked about while you were on the phone with him or on that meeting with that donor, well, he's going to be disinterested. And he said, you know what? You don't care about reducing red tape for starting businesses, if that's that donor's particular case. You just care about privatizing sidewalks. So you don't share the vision. Next, the plan or organization is not considered viable. You'd see this time and time again, especially at the presidential level, because it gets so much publicity. But candidates who are not polling well tend not to raise a lot of money. But the second those candidates, I think of Mike Huckabee in 2008, Rick Santorum just recently, they weren't polling, their money was kind of drying up. But the second they started picking up steam, they became viable. And so money started to pour in. People want to invest in something that they can see has a future and can go far. I'm from California, and I always think of the Republican Party in the state of California. Unfortunately, the Republican Party of California is not what it used to be. And so individuals don't want to invest in something that's broken. They don't consider it viable. There was internal problems, and quite frankly, they'd rather send money elsewhere in other parts of the country, because they believe that investing in that political party in the state of California wasn't going to pay any dividends, if you will. And last but not least, no one asked. It's that simple. No one asked for money. Sometimes you go about it. It's interesting. I had someone who wanted me to help them go on a missions trip, and they wanted to ask me for money, and we sat down, and this individual came to me, and we talked, and they actually never asked for money. And just because they were a friend, they probably felt uncomfortable. I was like, well, what exactly do you want me to do? He's like, well, would you be able to help me or sponsor me to send me to the mission trip? And I said, sure, just because you asked. But had I not gone back and said what exactly you want me to do, they wouldn't have asked and they likely would have not gotten a donation. It's simple. They do not donate, donors do not donate because they were not asked. So, answering key questions. Who should make the pitch? It is always best for your candidate or the organization's leader to do the ask. If you've got a friend, a colleague, a relative who knows the donor, you might have better luck using that person. One of the things I always tell individuals, and my boss, former boss, who was actually a very prolific individual in California, a California legislator, would always tell me, Paulo, when it comes to fundraising, it's all about relationships. It is about relationships. And if you build relationships with people, I asked him, is that the key to success in fundraising? He said, yes. So if you've got someone who has a better relationship with that potential donor, have that individual go out and kind of be your ambassador. Have them talk to the donor, let them know what it is that you want to do, kind of have a pre-meeting or a pre-ask to your candidate's ask, so that way the donor knows exactly what it is that you want, and it's going to make it easier for you to break the ice, because now you've got someone who's in the inside track with that donor who has kind of done a pre-ask on your behalf. You got to understand, you got to use sound judgment when it comes to answering that question. Who makes the pitch? Next, how to make the pitch. What kind of appeal does the potential donor most likely respond to? Again, access. Is it belief? Is it because they want to impact public policy? And when does that donor tend to donate? Again, you can go back to records. If they donate on the first quarter, second, third, or fourth, they donate on every quarter. When they actually tend to donate, the history behind it. If it's close to tax day, most people don't want to have to donate anything. A great time to always do ask is right at the end of the year. Why? Because especially if you're a nonprofit organization and your donations are tax deductible, you can always tell people, well, this is a tax deductible donation. If you're a candidate, obviously you can't do the same. You can't tell people that it's a tax deductible, always going for political purpose. But you got to understand best times, worst times. If you've got, for example, a donor who's got children, that's why it's important to know if they've got children too, and they just graduated and they're going off to college and they just had to pay a lot for the college tuition. It was just recently due. It's probably not the best time to approach that donor if he or she is a mid to low level donor in terms of money. You want to maybe approach them at a better time. Next, how to make that pitch. Do you make it in person and do you make it over the telephone? Well, phone calls allow you to solicit more help and it's in a shorter period of time. And this is where staff can help, as we discussed a little earlier, this is where staff can help keep a candidate on track. They can help by making sure that candidate sticks to his schedule. But make sure you always got to have someone put on that schedule that the candidate has to set aside time for making those phone calls. And have a list ready to go, notes, prepare it, make it so easy that they will have to, if they don't want to do it, they'll have to tell you no, and it seems illogical. My former boss, what he used to do is literally he would just go into his office and across the street, go into his office, shut the door. He had a list of people, literally just a cup of water and a telephone. And he had a little notepad in case he needed to take notes. He shut that door and he was in there for hours talking to people. Now, he was really working. We knew he was working because we would check up on him, make sure that he was making those phone calls, and he was. And staff can help a candidate running for office or a leader of an organization by making sure that they stick to the schedule. You got to understand donors are busy people, so you got to respect their time as you would like your time to be respected. Don't take too much time. If you say 30 minutes of your day is all I ask, 30 minutes better be it. If you say 10 minutes, 10 minutes better be it. If they say, well, I've got 5 minutes, go ahead. 5 minutes, don't take advantage. Don't try to push it if they're clearly in a rush. Now, if they're the ones inviting the conversation to continue further, go ahead and go for it. But if they're the ones that are kind of telling you, well, okay, I got to go, make sure that you respect their time. Personal appointments. So you have got to go where the donors want to go. If you like that Thai restaurant across the street, and that's where you've been craving it all week, and the donor wants to go to the Italian restaurant on the other corner, make sure you go to the Italian restaurant on the other corner. The donor is going to be donating to you. You want to make sure that they're in a comfortable setting. They're somewhere where they want to be. And if they want you to come out to their office, make sure you go out to their office. If the donor prefers those more public networking settings, perhaps an event, that would be a great opportunity for you to go and talk to that individual. Cold calling can be difficult if you don't know the individual. That's why it's always good to find out if someone, a friend, colleague, family member knows them, so they can do kind of a warm-up, a pre-call. And then one of the things when you are making those calls, when you are sitting down with that donor, you want to give them kind of confidential information. If you've got a poll that you just conducted and you're ready to release in 2 or 3 days, you want to go ahead and give them that information. It's going to come out in the public anyway, and it will make them feel like they are actually being shown something important. Obviously, you don't want to show them your entire plan, but you want to give them a few set of information that they would consider important that the public or the media has yet to have purview to. So, donor phone calls. Phone calls are extremely important for medium-sized contributions. Why? Because you're going through a list of people far quicker than you are with meetings. High-cost fundraising events. If you're having a fundraiser and it's the entry or the per plate is expensive, you want to make sure that the candidate is making those phone calls because you want good attendance at these events and you want people to pay that high money for those fundraising events. Private dinners with the organization's leader or the candidate. Those are extremely important. Phone calls are served best in these instances. For medium-sized contributions, reiterate that. High-cost fundraising events, private dinners with the organization's leader or the candidate. You want to make sure you use a comfortable space. You want to be comfortable. That candidate wants to be comfortable. Have snacks or beverages. Make sure the timing is appropriate and not awkward. Use the same tactics as appointments. Call on invitations and direct mail. If you send a direct mail, a follow-up would be, obviously make sure that they got the direct mail. A follow-up would be good for you to ensure that they got that information and they have it, and follow up making sure that you want to get that money from that donor. Next, the leader should always have a fundraising call list at hand. Best times I remember when I would be driving to the district with my former boss. This is where you can also put your staff to work. He would always have his list with him. He had his cell phone with him. I would do the driving, and so the district that he had at that moment, it's a huge district, took hours to get from one place to another. So he used his fundraising list as I drove to knock them out. Whenever your candidate has free time, whenever your leader has free time, make sure you've got a list for him or her to get on to ask other individuals to invest in their campaign. So making the ask, break the ice with the candidate. You want to make sure that it isn't awkward. Trust me, it is probably awkward for them as it is for you, and breaking the ice will be a good way. That's why it's important for you to do research on them. If they, for example, play tennis and you do too, you're going to casually mention how you were playing tennis this weekend. Oh, yeah, I played tennis too. Break the ice with the donor. Establish rapport. It's important for you to establish rapport with them. Let them know you're serious about your campaign. Let them know what it is that you want to do. Talk about what the donor wants to talk about, not about what you want to talk about. It goes back to the whole privatizing sidewalk. That's what you want to talk about, but that's not what the donor is interested at all. Then do not talk about privatizing sidewalks. Talk about what he or she wants to talk about. Based on your research, identify common ground with this donor. Talk about your common vision. Explain to them why investing in your campaign is a victory for them. Establish credibility. Talk about the landscape, your district, the goals that you want to reach. When individuals go and asking donors for money, one good thing to have is, let's say your campaign is working on a project, you want to let them know the project you're working on and how their contribution will get your campaign closer to, say, airing that radio ad that you've produced, or putting that television ad on your local television station. You want to give them something that they can take away. It's like, wow, my contribution will help you do X, Y, or Z. You always want to convey urgency. And this is where it can get a little tricky. You don't want to sound desperate, because that's not a good thing. You want to convey urgency. You want to let them know that it is extremely important for them to be part of your effort, and that without them you can't succeed, but you don't want to sound desperate. And always ask for a specific amount. You don't want to ask for a specific amount and then immediately go into something else. You actually want to pause and wait for silence. Just silence. The reason why is because they're thinking about a lot of things. Number one, is my wife or my husband going to be okay with this? Number two, how much money do I have in my savings account? Number three, what are my bills coming up this month? They have a lot to actually process after you've asked them for money. So silence is good. Wait a few seconds before moving on, so they can process the information.
Hello. How do you know how much money you should ask a person for? 'Cause just by looking at someone, you don't necessarily know how much money they have to give to candidates or to organizations. How do you determine that?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is important to know, because if it's a donor who has donated before, that's public record, so you can find out on average how much they've given. If it's someone who's never given before, you want to ask individuals. You want to find out what kind of business deals, if he or she has any business deals, and also you want to make sure you know the individual sitting across, other people who may know him or her, who can give you a little more information on how much they're willing to donate. You always also want to ask a little higher, because you don't want to cheat yourself out, if you will, out of a better donation by asking for less money. How much they will donate will depend also on how well you're able to convey your message, how well you're able to convey what it is you want to do for your campaign, and how their money will be used to further your cause, to further their cause together collectively. So, candidates are often going to get asked questions by donors. And professional donors, especially, who have done this time and time again, which are the ones that people tend to go back to because they've got a history of donating, they're going to ask important questions that your candidate or your leader needs to be able to answer. Number one, how are you going to succeed? Number two, where will your support come from? You have to obviously make sure that you understand your district, you understand the landscape, the political climate in the office that you're running for, or whatever cause it is that you're pushing. They will likely want to know how much money you've raised so far. Remember, no one wants to invest in something that is not viable. So you want to have those numbers off the top of your head. Your candidate, your leaders should know this. How much will the project cost? If you're asking them to invest in that radio spot you want to air, or that television spot you want to air, make sure your candidate knows how much it costs, because individuals will want to know, the donors will want to know. How are you going to raise that money? From who? One of the things that a lot of people, when you read about individuals who've successfully fundraised, is that they have a steering committee. They have influential leaders in their community, part of the steering committee, and each of them they're often called bundlers too. Each of them are responsible for raising a certain amount of money. So you tap into their networks, and you're able to bring in more. So, do you have a steering committee? That could, and if you don't, make sure you set one up. Donors will want to know. Donors who want to invest in your cause want to know how you plan on getting that money. Who is helping you? This could be who's running your campaign, which is in fact the next who's running your operation, but who is helping you? Is the previous elected official who held that seat, are they part of your effort? What organizations have endorsed you maybe? What organizations have come out against you? Remember, sometimes having an organization oppose you for that particular donor might be a good thing. So if for example, you're approaching a pro-life donor, and this donor is all about the pro-life cause, and you have NARAL who's coming out against you, and you want to tell them, well, I'm a pro-life candidate, etc. I know that's dear and near your heart. Well, NARAL is opposing me, and certainly they're not helping me in my campaign. I need all the help I need from pro-life advocates such as yourself. How much time do you spend on the phone? You'll be surprised. If they are, professional donors or donors who've come and donated time and time again, they will want to know how much time you're spending on the phone. And at least half of your time should be spent on the phone. What are you doing differently than someone who ran for the same seat? What's your message? Someone, we have office in politics, we have what we call the elevator message. And it's essentially condensing your message in 30 seconds. If you're able to tell someone what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, your message for the campaign in 30 seconds, and do so in a manner that's persuasive, you want to make sure you have that nailed down. And when a donor asks you what your message is, your candidate must be able to explain it. Asking, so making the ask and using those details. Ask for a specific amount and always ask high. It takes as much energy, as you'll see on the screen, to ask for $1,000 as it does for $100. So if you can get $1,000, make sure you're asking for it. Identify in your project, in your campaign, where that money will go towards. It will give them, again, a visual of what you're doing and how it can help you. Listen to their response. When I used to work for the bank, and while I was working at the bank, I was actually the bank's top salesperson, and oftentimes from that region, one of their top salesperson. Now, it wasn't because 100% of the people that I asked were saying, yes, 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 I want that product, I want that new line of credit or that certificate of deposit. No, it was because I was asking everyone, and I was listening to their response. Oftentimes someone said, oh, well, I'm not exactly sure. What that meant for me, give them more of the benefits. What else will they get if they open that particular product, open that line of credit, that certificate of deposit, savings account, etc. And more often than not, people said, oh, well, okay, I'll go ahead and do it. It's applying the principles of sales to the asking for money. Listen to what people are telling you, to the conversation. They will drop hints here and there, and always joke around, we have 2 ears, 1 mouth, so we can do twice the listening and half the talking. Don't be shy about pressing. If you have someone who's hesitant, you want to make sure that you expand on whatever it is that you discussed, that project, why that radio ad is going to be so fantastic, because you have the esteemed congressman of that area actually coming out and endorsing you, and you want that radio ad to be the one to announce the endorsement of the candidate. So think about it. Don't be shy about pressing, making sure that you divulge a little more information than you previously did. And you always want to close the sale at the meeting, which leads us to our next slides. You'll likely get 3 responses from the donors. The first one, the donor actually closes the deal. This is the best case scenario. They said, well, I'm in. I want to be an investor. I want to make sure that you win this race. Number 2, there's uncertainty. You can prompt the exchange of more information to help that potential donor reach the question. So, well, what is it that you want? What question do you want answered? Why do you need, what do you need me to do to help you understand what we're doing? Do you know someone, for example, if he is a lifelong member or perhaps gives and donated time and time again to the Taxpayers Association, and the Taxpayers Association endorsed you, you want to bring that up if they were hesitant. Well, the Taxpayers Association actually came out and endorsed me. We haven't released it to the public yet, but I want to make sure that you knew that. Well, now you've found more common ground with that donor. And then the third scenario is they'll tell you, I'll think it over. This closes the discussion without an answer. It's not what you want, clearly. But, you have to listen. Don't force it. If you can tell that they don't want to deal with that, they don't want to deal with writing a check at that particular moment, make sure that you thank the donor and make sure that you follow up the donor. Send them follow-up mail or follow-up phone calls so they know that they're appreciated. Now, after the ask, you got to remember, as my boss used to say, if you want to be a great fundraiser, it is about relationships, relationships, relationships. So that's not the last time you'll contact that donor. You must have a continuous relationship to make sure that these donors give. You got to ask that donor if they've agreed to give to you, to find and solicit other donors. Remember, you've got to use it as a spider web. You've got one individual who's asking a lot more people, their connections, their sphere of influence, and by doing so, it will obviously lead to more money for your project or your campaign. And always thank people for their efforts. Okay. You also want to invite these donors who attended. Send them, if you're having another event, you're having a special guest, make sure that you provide tickets for them to attend. Private briefings on issues or polls before they're released, a radio ad that you're getting ready to release, or a television ad, perhaps a mailer. Let them know, let them be involved in the campaign so they feel appreciated. So a few pointers, a few do's before we go to a few don'ts. You'll be surprised, but the first call is the toughest. When I had individuals come in and train, this was obviously for something different, but it was phone banking. A lot of them didn't want to touch that phone. They were afraid of touching that phone. I literally sat down with them and I'd say, we're just going to do 2 or 3 practice runs. This is what I want you to do. I want you to pretend like you're calling me. You're calling my house, and we're going to go through the script. Be the same with your candidate or the leader of your organization. Tell them, candidate A, let's just pretend like you're calling me. I'm the donor. Let's have the conversation. And you as the staffer or you as the person helping the donor, throw a few curveballs to make sure that they understand, that they feel comfortable. Placing the first call will be the hardest, but once you get more and more practice, the easier it'll become. Have them relax, be in a room setting that is relaxing, that they have water accessible. Don't give them reasons to get up from their chair and not make those phone calls. You want to conduct your research, be optimistic, be confident. You want to be convincing. Ask for specific amounts. You want to ask high, convey urgency, use silence as a tool, and last but not least, say thank you. And pointers, don'ts. Don't waste a donor's time. Do not take your allies for granted. Do not broach a volatile issue, especially if you don't know where they stand. Do not be argumentative. That's the last thing you want to be with a donor. Don't leave empty-handed. If they've promised that they will donate, okay, make sure you follow up. If they've agreed and have written you a check right there and then, wonderful. If they are unsure, ask for more information, what they need to know that might be able to make you seal the deal. Do not spend less than half your time fundraising. And last, do not forget to thank people. The do's, thank people. The do-nots, do not forget to thank people. So that concludes our person-to-person fundraising. I don't know, Patty, do we have any questions?
No, not right now, but I want to say thank you, and I know that nobody is watching this live right now because we had some technical difficulties, but I hope you are enjoying the recording. Next week, in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing another webinar on fundraising, which will be where to find the money. But until then, thanks again for teaching tonight, and thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time.